Wow. I've had technical difficulties in my life, but three fatal exemption errors in the last 20 minutes rebooting this computer that I'm coming to you live from right now. And the other computer is, the audio's not working. So, of course, there was that awesome song from Bludgeon Muffin, Be All Right, that I use as the theme for this show. And I have lots of other cool things in store, and you're getting none of them. But welcome to this week's Network Roundtable. I am excited to be here with you. This week, our +1 superhero is the fabulous Alexandra Riecke-Gonzales, and she has chosen as her +1 sidekick Teodora Petkova. We are very excited to be talking this week about communication. My co-host number 1 this week is Kristen, and joining her is Gina, part of the Team Troopers. And we are going to go ahead and start something new. We finally have an official name for the opening section of our show. I used to call it Loving All Over Each Other, and, well, that got some titters from the audience. So we have changed it to the Super Sidekick Admiration. That would be the superhero telling us why they admire the sidekick. And the other piece is the Sidekick Super Admiration, thus the sidekick telling why they admire the superhero. We're going to start out this week with +1 superhero Alex Riecke-Gonzales in the Super Sidekick Admiration, telling us why she chose and loves Teodora. Take it away, Alex.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Any chance I get to talk about communication, I will always take. Why I chose Teodora and why I admire her. First of all, I admire the fact that she speaks in English for all of us, even though it is not her first language. I can't admire that enough, especially as someone that studies communication. That's just incredible to me, because even in speaking English to a native English speaker, we have miscommunication, so I can't imagine the hurdles that she has to overcome. But I also admire her because for anyone that has read her writing, she says things in a way that makes so much more sense than anything else I've ever read. She is so in tune with life and how it functions, and within that she talks about communication and how it works into that, and she just does it in such a beautiful way that I don't think I'll ever be able to do. So I'm really happy that she's there to do it for me. So that's mainly why I admire her in this particular situation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Teodora, take it away with the Sidekick Super Admiration.
What do I say after that? Well, first, thanks for inviting me, Dennis. Alexandra, thanks for praising me for 2 minutes. And why I admire Alexandra? Because, first of all, because she's a teacher and she has students. This is an enormous thing. I've had students and I wasn't able to keep teaching because this is a very big challenge. And number one, I admire her because of that. Two, I admire her because she's doing something, at least for me, it's a new thing. We don't have it here. It's being a voice of a brand. In her description, she says that she's the voice of SEO Wise. And to have a third thing, she also writes great. She wrote a perfect post for Plus Your Business about having a business page and on Google Plus and keeping it and keeping the audience engaged and etc. So these are my 3 things.
I guess I got to remember to unmute. I'm not used to that. Okay, so some of the things that we are going to be doing today are a little different. This is the first episode of Season 3, the Season of Values. And I want to explain for the first time some of the things that are different. First of all, each week I am going to have a co-host 1 and a co-host 2 join me. And they are really going to do most of the guiding of the conversation. Those co-hosts have self-selected. They're part of a team of 16 of us, and they chose to do the particular weeks they chose because they resonated with the word or the core value that we're working with. They then select the +1 superhero, and the +1 superhero selects the +1 sidekick. That piece is the same as last season. What we are doing a little bit differently is we actually have a pretty solid format. We are going to be discussing the word of the week or the core value of the week based on 4 different phases. We're going to talk about the past. How is that word? What was it? What's its origin? Where did it start to have an impact on our +1 superhero and our +1 sidekick? Then we are going to be going into what's its current use, how important is it right now in your life, why is it so important, those kinds of questions. Then we're going to talk about the future. Where do we think that word is going as far as future usage, those kinds of things. And then the last thing, we're going to tie it all back to business because at the end of the day, Network Roundtable is about the softer side of business. So the last section will be tying it up in there, and in between each of those sections, we're going to go ahead and take your questions. This show will probably be a little long because we've got some housekeeping that we're having to do, like what I'm doing right now. At the end of the show, we're going to have our closing thoughts. Then I'm going to explain the next show, and then we're going to introduce a new piece in this show. We call it Shameless Self-Promotion. Everybody's going to get a chance to tell something that they have that's a big deal. Of course, we, in the off-season, felt like we had to make a big deal out of that shameless self-promotion, and we came up with that name. Hope you guys love it. Hope it still has the personality that this show has had for, can you believe it? 15 months we've been going. All right, so here we go. I'm going to turn it over to co-host number 1 to take away the first section, the history of the word communication.
All right. Hi, everyone. So I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but hopefully I can work through that. Gina and I decided that we wanted to make this backstory part a little bit shorter than the other sections because there's just so much to get into with Alex and Teodora. They have so much to give us. And so we're going to ask you to give us maybe your elevator backstory speech. Let's start with Alex.
Oh, geez. With something as complicated as communication, an elevator speech? Okay. Well, communication, basically, I mean, we're human beings. We've been doing it forever. Even before we had words, we had nonverbal communication, which is, you know, facial expressions, hand movements. So it's just kind of part of being a human being. That would be the history. It has evolved, obviously, in different parts of the world to develop different languages, though many people speak English today. And I think what's more important than the history of it is what communication actually is, because a lot of times we overlook that definition, and you can really, most people can come up with a definition if you actually ask them, but it's basically using nonverbal and verbal forms of symbols to have co-created meaning. So that is like the most basic definition I can give you. We could go into the little details of it with my students. I take an entire class period to pick apart the definition of communication, but I'm not going to today because this is my elevator speech. So just keep that in mind. Anytime you are communicating, you are using nonverbal and verbal symbols to have co-created meaning with either a single individual or a group of individuals.
Excellent. All right. Gina, would you like to ask any questions? I know you had one that kind of goes along with that.
Yeah, so Alex, how do you take such a wide, broad topic and funnel it down to your focused interest? You've really centered your whole life on the art of communication, and how do you kind of bring it in to choose the direction that you've wanted to go in?
That's a good question. It's really, really hard, especially because I am doing my master's degree, and once you get into your master's and eventually your PhD, they really train you to have a more focused area. So the broader idea of what I personally study is mass media, but the smaller portion of that I study is social media. And in social media, the difficulty is that right now in communication we have four broad fields. We have mass media, we have interpersonal, we have global, and then we have organizational. Those are the four different kinds of communication. The tricky part, as you mentioned about communication, though, is interpersonal weaves into mass media, and mass media weaves into global, and global can weave into organizational. So a lot of times you do end up tapping into these different parts of communication, but you really have to, I think of it like any business owner. It's really easy to get distracted by all the other stuff, right? Like if I was a business owner, it would be so easy for me to just sit in social media all day, which is why I can't be a small business owner. I do social media.
Guilty as charged.
Right? It's really easy to get distracted, so I have to keep coming back to myself, and I do have an advisor that keeps, she's just standing there poking me like, go back to what you're studying, go back to what you're studying. It is really hard to funnel and just keep funneling down until you really figure out what you want to study. But yeah, I would say that guidance and just seeing what personally interested me to start. I do find interpersonal communication interesting, but there's something about social media with that mass media aspect that interests me more than just interpersonal relationships. So I took that route.
Thank you. Great answer.
No problem.
Yep. Definitely. So now let's move to Teodora. What is your backstory, elevator speech?
Of course, I looked up in the dictionary, in the Latin dictionary, and saw the meaning of communication, of the verb. I'm not going to say the verb because it sounds like my surname. But it means sharing, and its first meaning was sharing bread, which is strange. And then, of course, it's sharing meaning or sharing plans. And then I was trying to come up with a definition, which is kind of meta description long, not a lot of characters. And it was that communication is trying to project a paradigm over another without making a mess. It's not that long, but this is my thing.
That's wonderful, because I asked for elevator speech and that's what we got. That's super.
Okay.
Let's see, where should we go from here? Should we move into our next section, current story?
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay. So, how does communication, how does that word influence you in your daily life? Alex.
Oh, me. How does it not? I'm going to ask, because it's really easy for us, and I wrote this in my reshare of the event, and Gina came in and had a conversation with me about it. It's really easy for us to forget how much we rely on communication because we do it so fluidly and we do it so often that it's really easy for us to forget, right? what we're doing to communicate, how we're communicating, when we're communicating, because we just do it naturally. One of my favorite things, I'm not that fond of the book that I use when I teach, but one of my favorite things in that book is the section that talks about nonverbals. It starts with, you can't not communicate. And the reason it says that is because no matter what our face is doing, no matter what our hands are doing, we are sending a message. Whether we're sending the message we want to be sending or not, we are sending a message. So there really isn't a part of my life that doesn't rely on communication. And that's what actually intrigues me so much about it, is that we feel like it's something that's so natural, yet miscommunication happens so often that it's interesting that we don't pay more attention to this thing that we rely on so much. So when do I use it in my life? All the time.
Yeah, that you bring up something that I was wanting to ask also, which is to just invite some conversation about the kinds of communication that bypass language. And how do we're doing it all the time, and how do we become more sensitive to the cues and the nuances so that so we can be more deliberate and conscious in our spoken communication? Because we all tend, we hear the word communication and we all just kind of go into this assumption that we're talking about words and we're talking about language. But there's so much that's going on way lower down deep than that, and more automatically, and we're reading each other all the time, and we're all looking for that limbic connection, so we're craving it too, and it can steer wrong in so many ways. And I think it is a really great thing to step back and kind of think, what is my body saying? What am I unconsciously communicating? What are the messages that I'm sending? God, and there's just countless ways that we're doing that in every single moment. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, I think this is actually I'm going to pass it off to my sidekick, Teodora, because as someone who, she transitions between cultures and languages, I think it would be really interesting to hear her point of view on this idea of how do you communicate even if you don't have the words to communicate exactly what you want to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I use metaphors, my favorite thing. Just wanted to say something that Gina mentioned, that communication can steer wrong. I think it can steer wrong only if you are not centered. If one of the people that communicate is not does not know what they want to project or say. But that's another thing. Somebody from the comments said that my name, understood that my name meant communication. It doesn't. It's just the way I pronounce my name in English is very difficult, and so is the pronunciation of the verb communicate in Latin. As for the everyday communication, thinking about communication, I came up with this: how do I communicate to my cat that she's not supposed to make noise while I'm reading? This is impossible, just because we have different values. So communication is so hard, and we're so unaware of all the hard things that involve communicating.
Okay, you're talking about it being hard. Yeah. So now I have this question. How do you turn it around? Like, if you find yourself miscommunicating and someone responds to you in a way that you know that they didn't get your intent, how do you turn that around? What do you do? Like, what are some steps that you can take to get them to see, okay, but I really meant this.
I'm just trying to make myself clear and say this another way.
Yeah.
Or trying to look myself from their perspective.
Ah,
And
yes.
first play the thing that they think I am. And then from that point, from that role or something, I'm expressing what I really mean in their language.
I think it's important to use iMessages as well. Like I feel like this was miscommunicated. I don't know. Like I don't know how to do that right. So like how would one phrase something in an iMessage format? Like when you know that you need to regroup and you need to share something in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, we would definitely, especially in like the field of communication, in looking at conflict management at a very top level, we do generally recommend making it, I feel that the message wasn't received the way that I thought I sent it. You make it so that it was I feel or I think, so that you're not accusing the other person, so that you're not saying you're wrong. You're saying I think that there may be miscommunication. And that's literally anytime there's a conflict on Google+, you'll see my response to it is, I think there's a miscommunication here. And I know it drives a lot of people nuts, but 9 times out of 10, that's usually what's happening. It's a miscommunication. Now, it could be that they think that they're communicating and they think they're getting their message across, and that's where it becomes a really, that's where you get into trouble. That's where conflicts really do become conflicts, when both people think that the right message was sent and the right message was received, and they're not willing to do what Teodora was talking about and say, I think there might be a problem here. I think that we're not communicating correctly. I think that there's a problem here, and that's why it takes a lot of conflicts. They work out when you have one person that can do that self-reflection, when you have someone that can, yes, I'm going to say it, that can reframe the way that they sent their message, rather than saying something like, well, you did this, saying something like, well, okay, I saw that you did this and it made me feel this way. So that you're offering them, this is how it made me feel, and then they can come back with, oh, well, I didn't mean it like that. I mean, we've all had that situation, right? I had an ex-boyfriend, short story for you. I had an ex-boyfriend who we sat down to dinner at a wedding, and he was like, wow, you're eating a lot of food. I was mad at him for a week because I thought he called me fat. I thought he was calling me fat. And at the end of the week, when I was finally ready to talk to him about it, he was like, that wasn't what I was saying. What I was saying was, you don't usually eat a lot. I was just kind of surprised. I was trying to have a conversation about it. And I just took it because of my perspective, because I was in my early teens. I was very self-conscious about my body. That's what came to mind. That's how I felt. I didn't think about his perspective and about the fact that he really didn't care about how fat or thin I was, or he really didn't care about how much I was eating. He was just making an observation. So it does take that person. You have to have one person in the conflict, at least, that's able to step back and say, okay, what happened to the communication? What is their perspective? That big word, empathy, right?
And if there's not, is it possible for there to be another person to step in and be that person, be that perspective for them? Is that appropriate? You think in the realm of social media?
In the realm of social media, you have to be careful, because that person that steps in has to be respected by both parties. If
yeah,
that
you can't
person,
be teaming up.
yes, exactly. If that person who steps in, and I think we've all seen this happen, right? If that person who steps in is clearly on one person's side, It's now it's not one person stepping in and saying, "Whoa, guys, let's see what's going on here." It's one person stepping in and saying, "You're wrong. He's right. I'm sticking with him." So
And the moment someone feels ganged up on, it's
yes.
over.
Yes.
I tend to do that a lot. Like I go in and I find situations where like one person is being attacked or not even attacked, but just that like it's clearly, you know, there's definitely a line there, and I have fun. That's what I love doing. I love trying to go in there and be the diplomat. I don't know why, but I've just found so much value in making connections that way.
That's interesting. Hey, mediators make a lot of money. Just saying.
It's a great career.
We'll talk later.
One of the tools that I find myself using pretty successfully is when there's been a misunderstanding and I have that feeling that something's going wrong and that a communication isn't going smoothly, or that I am being reactive to something that somebody said. Just going and asking them to re-explain what their meaning was, just a simple question, can really open it up, because usually when we learn more, we feel differently. It's what we make a lot of assumptions inside our own system, and we come to things within our own context. So like Alex with your ex-boyfriend, you were hearing him in the only way you were capable. But once you were able to ask him what he actually meant, it neutralized the situation. So that can often just be a salve for our hurt feelings or our conflicted feelings.
Yeah, that's so true. And we have to be so much more careful, guys, so much more careful in a computer-mediated context. Email, social media, text messaging. Anything that is mediated by some sort of device, we have to be so much more careful, because though we do have things to compensate for the lack of nonverbals, we have emojis, which I love. I use them all the time, excessively. It's kind of sad. We do have emojis. We have, you know, LOL. We have these things to try to indicate JK that we're joking. But we have to be so much more aware and so much more careful about how we're sending our message when we're in this kind of computer-mediated context. And again, that's what fascinates me.
Sorry. Also, something of interest for Kristen that we've been discussing as we've been planning for the show is just the multicultural aspect of, particularly in Google+. You know, all these people coming together who didn't know each other before from different locations around the planet and different cultures, even when their locations are close. So we need to use caution using slang, you know, any kinds of expressions, that the colloquialisms that we're accustomed to. We have no idea how those will be responded to by somebody from another culture. So working on our clarity, and then going back to what Teodora was saying, is if we're centered and we have our intentions clear, it's going to be much more feasible for us to come across in a clear way, and always keeping in mind that we're talking to people that we don't know well and that aren't used to our way of communicating. It takes a long time for us to get used to each other's communication styles. And we each have our own, and we each have several to pick from. And so that brings me to one of my questions. How do you choose which communication style when? Like, how do you know when to use the one that you think you'd like to, but you're not really sure if it's appropriate, and you're kind of setting yourself up with each individual and sometimes with several in one thread?
I am going to ask Teodora to answer this one first, and then I'll piggyback off of her, because I feel like she probably deals with a lot more. I mean, I deal with a lot of people from a lot of places, but the majority of people I talk to are American or in the UK. So I'd like to hear Teodora's answer.
Well, the short answer is intuition, and comparing everything to real life. And when I answer or talk to somebody, my first thing and the umbrella term is respect for the other person. And from that stems everything else.
God, that's such a good answer.
Yeah, what can you add to that?
Right? This is why I need Teodora here, because she goes, I mean, she understands that a lot of communication really does go to the heart of who you are. We have to start with our values and our personal ethics before we can understand the way that we truly personally communicate. Starting with respect for the other person is just, I mean, God, it's such a good answer. It is such a good answer. I could give you little tips and tricks, but I can't beat respect. We're gonna stick with that.
Good bottom line, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to say there's a ton of conversation going on, and my comment tracker is broken, so I can't share anything on screen, and that's why my overlay it broke at the same time. Because anyway, but one of the things that I wanted to point out here is there's this big conversation started with Zara Altera's question about gender differences. Her and Marilyn Moore have been going at it back and forth consistently. Great conversation about gender differences, and I do want to have us touch on that a little bit. But Kathy Brown said, yes, Zara Altera and Marilyn Moore, don't you think? I feel women are more emotional commenters and more likely to be offended. We're so complicated, LOL. I just want to say, not all men are unemotional. In fact, this one right here is way too emotional in his communication. Just saying.
Oh my goodness. I have seen so many men, like the majority of the butthurt kind of conversations on G+ that I've seen are men. Just have to say that.
I haven't seen one with women, actually.
We're so mature.
But there is, I can speak to that a little bit in that men and women they do communicate differently. Obviously, not everybody fits these criteria, right? But the big difference between men and women that they have found is that men, they communicate with purpose. So men only communicate when they have a reason to. If they want something, if they need something, if they need to understand something, then they communicate. Women, we communicate to communicate. We want to talk about our feelings. We want to talk about what's happening. We want to talk about what happened during the day, right? So this is one of my favorite things to talk about with my students, because you know, like the cliche, like, he never listens to me. It's because you're not giving him purpose. He sees no purpose in the conversation. So that is one big difference that they have found between men and women. And obviously that creates issues when men and women try to communicate, right? But I do have to say, most of the issues that I have seen online have been between men. Women, not so much. I don't know. But we do tend to, I think men are more aggressive and women are more passive aggressive in general, but that's just a personal idea. I don't have research to back that one up.
That's so interesting, because like when you're writing something, you have to have forethought before you write it. So you're thinking about it and then you write it. But when you're just communicating just verbally, then a lot of times you get the like everything just all But I don't know. I just think that is just really fascinating. I can't wait until you do the research, Alex.
I like that technical term. That's me so much of the time. Things are so clear inside my own head, and then when I try to formulate them out with my voice, they just get kind of scrambled. And I find writing to be a much more clear form of communication in general, because I can slow it down and I can be really careful about my choices of words and all that. And that actually, the blah brings me to another point that I wanted to make and that I mentioned in my share of the event, which is there's also the way we are communicating with ourselves. And I feel very strongly that the voice that we have in our own heads, our own inner dialogue, is really steering so much of our outer communication. And it's kind of like the pre-step to what comes out. And when we are less aware of what our own inner conversation is, I think there's more of a chance for that kind of hurtful or confusing or less intentional, less respectful kind of communication that may come out, even if it's just a facial expression. So I'm curious where that ties in, and also in all of our questions to you, Alex, we're constantly aware of the fact that you have an academic perspective that most of us do not. So we really appreciate any enlightenment that you can share from studies and from bigger knowledge.
I am always happy to share that bigger knowledge. We just use bigger words. That's really what it is that nobody wants to read. Okay, before I do have some information on that, but before I touch on that, I want to turn it to Teodora because she is clearly much more focused on the internal before communicating. She's clearly much more in tune with that than I am. So, Teodora, what do you think about internal communication?
What came up in my mind was internal linking. It's like internal linking, internal connecting of the dots. So the more internal linking you have, the bigger graph you form in yourself, and the more touch points you have to connect with others, and not to be offended, to let the argument in or start arguing with somebody. Mm-hmm.
There she is with her metaphors. Love it.
I'm the short forms person.
So we have a semantic web inside our own brain with the dots connecting. And yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and
an overload too.
It can be. It can be. And it does directly, self-talk is how we term it. It's just self-talk, the way that you talk to yourself. And we actually, when we talk about communication, there's a diagram of communication. You have the sender and the receiver of the message. You have the channel in between them, which Teodora and I talked about channel a couple of days ago. And then you have the big thing that I want to talk about is noise. So anytime that you're sending or receiving a message, there's noise that is going to affect that message. And there's a lot of different kinds of noise. And one of the different kinds of noise is self-talk. It's the way that we talk to ourselves. It's that internal conversation that we have with ourselves prior to, during, and after receiving any sort of message. So you're totally right, Gina. It has, and of course it's connected to, the way that we see ourselves, our self-perception affects everything that we do, including communicate. So there is that aspect of it, but there's also this aspect of it can become noise to sending and receiving a message. So going back to my example with my ex-boyfriend, the noise for me was self-talk. It was that prior to receiving that message, I had constantly told myself, you're fat, you need to lose weight, this is a problem. So once I received that message, it became noise to the message, and so the message that I received wasn't the one that was sent. So there are two different aspects to that idea of self-talk, but it is absolutely key. Self-talk, self-perception are huge, huge, huge components of communicating a message and also receiving messages.
Yeah, and then it gets in the way. It creates a barrier so that we can't really hear. And we can't perceive what's actually happening because everything that we're taking in is colored and distorted by our self-talk and our self-perception.
I absolutely love what Nina is saying here. When I miss a dot, I use my sense of humor. That gives everybody some time to relax and to focus again. That is awesome.
That's very true. A lot of us deal with issues or conflict with humor and joking. So
I never do that.
But there's a fine line there, though, because sometimes, like, if you're always known to be the jokester, how do people know when to take you seriously?
Interesting. And I'm seeing that Nina had an earlier comment where she's saying it's so difficult to ask the question and accept that there might be a miscommunication. So that coupled with the comment about using your humor is, I think, really interesting. And I'm curious if Nina does that when she finds herself uncomfortable with that. Is that when she turns to her humor? I'd love to hear what you have to say about that, Nina.
I know. We should have had Nina on, too. It's part of our T group, huh, Teodora?
So what about, and here goes the guy talking when he needs to get something done. What about communication within business? How does that play? With what we've been discussing so far, how would you tie that into the world of business? Alex.
Oh, geez. How much time do we have? I mean,
as much as you want.
Thank you. Usually, organizations, when they think about communication, if you ask business people about communication, they automatically think marketing. That's the first place they go. The first place they go is, oh, well, this is how we communicate with our customers. And that's great. You should definitely think about that. You should think about how you're marketing to your customers. You should think about how you actually speak to your customers from a person to a person rather than just like a billboard, right? But there's so much more that goes into communicating within an organization. And I don't personally study organizational communication. I took like one class on it. I personally find it kind of dull. But there are multiple, so you have your marketing materials. You have the way that you talk to your customers directly, and you know half of those conversations are dealing with conflict, right? A lot of the conversations that you have with customers don't like to tell you when they're happy. They like to tell you when they're not happy. And you have to find a way to have that conversation with them when a lot of the times they're in a state of, I'm mad, I need someone to blame. So you have to consider the perspective that they are approaching you from, right? And then you have this other piece that is really, really important that a lot of organizations kind of look past, and that is internal communication within your organization. So with small businesses, it's usually easier, right? You're dealing with 1, 5, 10 people maybe. When we look at huge corporations, I mean, they're dealing with communication between hundreds of thousands of people, and they have to function within these hierarchies, and it gets really complicated, and internal communication can be a huge source of conflict. It can be a huge, it's a place where a lot of things go wrong in organizations, and it can be a place where a lot of people it can be part of the reason that a lot of people end up leaving their jobs. It's not because they don't like what they do, it's because they don't like the people that they're working with. And a lot of that isn't that they don't actually like that person, is that they can't communicate with them. It's that they haven't figured out a way to have a conversation, or the organization isn't structured in a way that allows them to have that conversation, and that leads into a whole nother set of issues. So, I mean, within business, communication is so, I mean, the entire business really rests on your ability to communicate with different kinds of people in a lot of different situations. And that's where the small business kind of has it harder than the corporations, because the corporations are generally very segmented. They have their jobs and they have their specific people that they talk to, right? Small businesses, you're talking to everybody, and you are having to communicate with so many different people in so many situations, so many contexts, and trying to take on all of their perspectives. That's asking a lot. That's asking a lot of communication skills. That's asking a lot of empathy, which I know Marilyn Moore is gonna like, because she wrote a great piece on empathy. So yeah, that's I could keep going, but I'm like way over.
I would love it if you did keep going, because that is such a fabulous topic. We could have like a whole entire just training session, I think, from you on that.
I'd have to brush up a little bit more on it. The only way that I've looked at personally, the only way I've looked at it is motherhood and career. That's the only place that I've really dove into organizational communication, because when you look at the conversations around, we call it dialectical tension, but if you look at the conversations in mass media around motherhood and choosing a career and being a mother that has a career, it's really interesting the messages that we are sending to particularly women of my age. So that's the only place that I've really looked at organizational communication, honestly. But again, organizational communication goes into mass media, it goes into global, it goes into interpersonal. It really touches on a lot of the other parts of communication that we have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I'd say as a small business owner, communication is everything. From the very first moment of interacting with a prospective client all the way through to project completion to continuing on the relationship for years to come. And when our communication internally has discord and we're not really aligned, it becomes almost impossible. But with the different people that we're getting to know, we actually have very limited time getting to know them, and yet we need to have perfect communication. So I think that's what creates a lot of the challenge, and it requires a tremendous amount of empathy and a tremendous amount of active listening and reading between the lines, particularly because a lot of the communication is via email and very fast, and we don't get to necessarily spend a lot of time together getting to understand each other's styles. So we have to constantly adjust to conflict resolution styles of other people. I mean, all that stuff. It's just a huge, huge piece. And I really appreciate everything that you said, Alex, about that and the complexities. We've worked with some big organizations that have some of those challenges, and then we have to come in and try to help them to navigate with each other so that we can produce a project for them. It's pretty interesting.
Speaking of a larger arena, larger corporation, larger, just everything larger, I want to make sure that we get to one of the things that I just want to get to. Teodora, you do a lot of work with like translating. And I would just love it if you could please speak a little bit about your experience with that. How do you go about being from where you are to thinking in a different way, like in a different language? that's just absolutely amazing to me, and I like want to say I'm not worthy because that's just so cool.
I had a question for Alexandra, or maybe I should first answer your question, which
However
I'm not
you want.
sure I understood. Alexandra, you were speaking about larger corporations, and do you think there is a point at which the communication within these organizations can be organized by the so-called invisible hand? Like, if you're not trying to organize from up to everybody else, you're just making all the senders and the receivers compatible.
That's a really interesting way to organize individuals. I mean, there's different ways. When we talk about like group communication, there's a lot of different ways that you can organize groups, right? But one of the things that we always see in groups is that there is a leader. So that would kind of hint at the invisible hand that you're talking about, because a leader can take, we put it on a spectrum to make it easier. There's the laissez-faire leader who's just kind of like, I trust all of you, it's cool, we'll get it done. And then there's the democratic leader, you know, who does things by votes, it's by majority rule. And then there's the authoritarian leader who is, the authoritarian leader more follows that hierarchical structure that you're talking about. It's you work with this person, you do this, that's it. So what I see you talking about is more the laissez-faire kind of group work, and it does work as long as you have what you were talking about, respect, and as long as you have everybody understanding the goal. So one of the big make it or break it's for group work is that everybody understands and appreciates the goal of the group. There are other things that make a group successful, but that's one of the big things, is that everybody understands, appreciates, and wants to achieve that goal that has been set for the group. So I think it is totally possible what you are talking about, and I think it would be interesting to actually see an organization that matches up people based on the way they communicate, or almost personalities. I think that would be really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, that was a nice answer.
Okay, now you answer Kristen's question.
My thing about translating and how did I get where?
Like thinking in another language, like, because it is different, right? I mean, I've just heard from different people, like, wow, we don't even have a word for that sort of thing. Like, how do you deal with that and do it so effectively that you get from being in a country where you don't even have semantic search to like being like PYB writer. Like, I mean, yes, I know Google Plus is like a small area in the web space, but it's big to those of us that are in it, and PYB is huge to those of us in it. You know, how do you get from where you are to be able to communicate so effectively that you get asked to be a part of these things?
I believe in the power of universal concepts. I know this sounds too big, but this is what it is. There are more common things between people than there are differences.
Like, I'm like crying right now. That is so beautiful. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
That kind of brings me to thinking about spirit and soul, and it kind of takes me to that place of the feelings that we can get when we're really connecting with somebody and we just know what they're trying to communicate. We just feel the connection, we feel that understanding, and then words just drop away. You know, you've got that, the look in somebody's eye, and how you can kind of register what's going on, and that's just this really beautiful part of communication, and kind of something that I thrive on and am looking for all of the time. And Kristen, I'm just so moved.
Yeah, I made her cry.
Yeah, you really did.
This is awful.
No,
Yeah.
that's how meaningful what you were saying really is, and you just tapped into the kind of the underbelly of this whole topic and what really matters. And I'm just so grateful that you did that.
Big time. Oh. Someone else is gonna have to take it because I'm like needing to. Thank you. Yeah, like that's just so powerful. I think it's amazing. Like I've got a brother in Taiwan. I have a brother or sister in Kenya, and to me, like there is no boundary. I am all for one world concepts, and yeah, just how you put that was just very beautiful. Someone else.
Okay, I'm reading a book called The Metaphors We Live By. This is how we structure our understanding of the world around us and in us. And in its beginning, there's a chapter about how argument and arguing is always related to war. Like, I won this argument or something. And then the authors just suggest, why don't we relate arguing to dancing? There's no right or wrong side. We're just dancing.
Love
Am I
that.
going to make you cry again?
Oh my
This is
gosh.
supposed to be funny.
Oh, I totally, that resonates with me so much. I am a dancer. Danced since I was 3, and
I know.
yeah, that is like just absolutely beautiful. Makes me think of capoeira and how powerful it really is. Capoeira is traditionally known as like more of a ornamental kind of dance, but it is sparring, and that interchange, that's what it is. I love that. Thank you for providing that metaphor.
Yeah, and then you think about all of the arts, and I know that both you, Teodora, and Alex are very interested in arts of all forms. And I just recently read your article about comparing conceptual art with the semantic web, and art as a form of communication. I just think it's important not to forget that we have so many forms and so many different vehicles for communicating our ideas. I'd be curious if either of you have any comments to make about that.
I mean, I think that any form, what we just saw between Teodora and Kristen, it really, on both ends, it takes a certain amount of openness to have that happen in regular communication. And I think communicating through the arts takes another level of openness, because, and I feel really weird saying this to you, Gina, because you were an artist, still are a little bit, not so much, but I mean, the artists really, they are putting a piece of them into that artwork, and that piece they are willingly sharing with everybody else. So that's their openness. That's their way of being open. It's through their artwork. It's their way of expressing that openness. But the viewer also has to have the openness to see and receive that message. So I think art really just takes communicating through, whether it's painting or dance or even the dramatic arts, it takes another level of openness and understanding to actually have the message come across. And you have to be willing to you have to be totally open to miscommunication, right? It's like a given. It's like a well, this is what I see, but maybe not. maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I see from my perspective. So that's what's really that's what I have to say about the arts.
Nicely put. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
there's a level of vulnerability that has to exist and courage. And the thing is, as I've kind of transitioned more to writing, I realized that it's the same, except that with writing you can be more concise and specific, whereas with art making it's more of an abstracted quality of what the message actually is, because the interpretation can vary so dramatically depending on your viewer. So with verbal and written communication, you're really trying to hone it, pull it in to something that is very clear and very understandable, whereas with art, it's corny to say it's more from the heart, but in a way that's really true, because it's a lot more about intuition and abstracted ideas and asking questions.
Okay, I gotta step in. This has been amazing. We've got a secondary chat going on that none of you out there can see, and Kristen made a recommendation that maybe we want to try and attempt a follow-up, because there is so much we haven't touched on. We haven't gone into the future of where this word's going, and we could continue talking a ton about just the communication in general, the subject of art communication. I think there's a lot more to delve into. Anyway, so I want to hear from the audience. Do you guys want us to try and put this team back together for a special show at some point in time, and maybe even include Nina if we can make that happen? Throw it out there. Give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. We do need to start closing down, so I'm going to go through the panel in this order. We're going to go Alex, and then Gina, and then Kristen, and Teodora will finish up. First, we're going to go through closing thoughts. Then we're going to go back through the circle on shameless self-promotion. Alex.
Okay, first of all, I love the title of that segment, I have to say. That's great. Closing thoughts. We really have just scratched the surface of communication, and as I said, I always welcome the opportunity to talk about communication, because the more we know about it, the more aware we'll become of how we are doing it, why we are doing it, and it'll make us more effective communicators. I truly do believe that. So thank you all for letting me have this conversation.
Gina, you're up.
This has been a really rich conversation, and I agree that we've just barely scratched. I don't even think we've scratched. I mean, we've just pre-scratched the surface, and I'm pretty itchy. So I would love to have a follow-up. I relate to and feel a very deep resonance with everything that we've talked about, and communication is also one of my biggest passions, and I spend a lot of energy working on clear communication and really efforting at that within myself and in my communication to others. So I just love the opportunity to talk about it, and it's why I was so thrilled to get to join in on this today. So I'll just leave it at that. It's been a very stimulating conversation. I feel very excited.
Totally wonderful. How do I add to that? I don't know. I love diplomacy. I love everything open source, just transparency. Like, I see no need to keep anything. A lot of people kind of feel like they need to hold on to things and put it behind a paywall. And I don't know. I guess I'd be that shoeless person walking in the streets and giving love to everyone. I just think, if you have something, share it. Thank you, everyone who has been a part of this. This is amazing, and I just love everybody here. Go ahead, Teodora.
Okay, thanks Alexandra, thanks Gina, thanks Dennis, thanks me. I heard that from my nephew. He's 6 years old, and he was thinking himself, whatever, because I'm writing about open narratives now, and want to end with the idea that we didn't touch upon communication between devices and machines. So I hope we'll do that.
We have like 5 more shows coming out of this.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. Networked Roundtable, the season of communication.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, because I'm so busy during the days, this might have to be an evening show. So my closing thoughts are, I now am asking a new question. Would you all like to watch an evening network roundtable or a weekend network roundtable? Because I do have a job. All right, so shameless self-promotion. Alex, take it away.
Yay! Okay. This is my shameless self-promotion. I will be part of the Social Media Today Power Chat with David Amerland, and the first episode is featuring Gideon Rosenblatt. It's going to be an awesome conversation about, does social business make sense? I'm going to try my best to keep up with the two of them. It's going to be fascinating. It is on the, I'm going to confuse it with the other one. It is on the 21st or 22nd, noon Eastern Standard Time. If you want to find out about it, go to Social Media Today.
Gina, shameless self-promotion.
You can find my writing on our business blog, fateyes.com/blog, if you'd like to check out some of my articles. And you can always find me on Google Plus in the stream. Just go to my profile.
Okay, I'm gonna say I'm gonna push the focus to my team, Wheel Media. Check them out. We've got some new things coming up, and some really exciting stuff coming up for this season for everyone. So make sure you check out social media hangouts on Sundays. And also, I just want to say that give a shout out to Jason T. Weiser. I'm back with the team. Yay, On Track Tips. So check us out there too, On Track Tips.
Teodora.
Removing shameless and removing promotion. I've got some cool guests coming to my dialogue section on my website. So I'm looking forward to showing them to my Google Plus friends.
Cool. And I just picked up a new HOA I'm going to be producing. I'm really excited about this. I'm doing it in conjunction with Wayne Meter and the World for Change. There is a lumber yard here in Utah that is having a big flip the switch party for turning on their massive solar systems at 2 locations. And we're going to be broadcasting that as a live HOA with the speeches and stuff, and then we'll have a question and answer time after all the speeches are done. Should be an interesting roundtable discussion on solar energy and how it works in the retail world. All right, well, that's this week's show. Next week, we have joining us Kellen and Joy Flukinger, and our subject next week is decisiveness. So make sure you join us Monday for Who Are You? And that's our trailer show, our micro HOA, and on Friday we will be diving into the importance of decisiveness past, present, future, and in your business. Thanks so much for watching. See you all next week.